please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Justin Bernstein. I'm the president of the American Mock Trial Association, and I'm here today to talk about how AMTA writes its cases each year. I've had the privilege of working on about a half dozen cases.
So who actually writes AMTA's cases?
AMTA has a case committee, or actually two case committees. We have a criminal case committee and a civil case committee, and they alternate writing cases every other year. Sometimes they start from scratch and they come up with an idea on their own. They write a case. Other times they adapt a case that's been submitted by a competitor, former competitor, coach, something like that.
Since there are coaches involved in this process, do you find that that gives their teams an unfair advantage?
We haven't seen that. The case comes out in August. Everybody has access to it. And over the course of the 6 months from then until our official tournaments start in February, there aren't a lot of secrets by the time February rolls around. So when we've looked at some numbers, we haven't found any advantage to teams who have coaches on the case committee. For example, coaches on the case committee don't have their teams do any better in the years that they're writing the case than when they're not.
So when does AMTA actually decide on what case they're going to use?
So typically about 6 months to a year before the release of a case, AMTA starts brainstorming what the next case topic is going to be. That's going to be vetted. The committee is going to think about what kind of case is topical, what's going to be a good case in terms of what will be fun in the courtroom, and then the writing process begins once the topic is chosen. So usually about 3 or 4 months before the case is released.
So how long does it take to actually write a full case?
It depends. When we have a case we're just adapting, then it doesn't take as long, obviously. When you're starting from scratch, it usually takes a couple months.
Are cases that AMTA picks ever based on real trials?
We don't base them on real trials, but we do try to make sure they're topical. We prefer, when possible, to have topics that address important social issues.
How do you write cases that are both challenging to experienced competitors but accessible to newer schools or new schools in general?
That's actually one of the hardest things we do when writing cases. Because on the one hand, we know that we have some brand new students competing each year, students who've never done mock trial before, perhaps who don't have any coaches, or even schools that are brand new competing in mock trial. And on the other end of the experience spectrum, we've got really strong competitive teams that attend 9-10 invitationals a year, have a dozen or so veteran students. They've got coaching staffs, and the level of complexity that the first group can handle is going to be different than the level of complexity the second group can handle. So I think of it as writing a case similar to the way you sort of create a game like checkers. It's easy enough that everybody can play, but it's challenging enough that the top players can distinguish themselves. That's our goal anyway. So how do you do that? Well, it's easier said than done. But you try to think about ways to make it really clear what the case is about so everybody can participate. You try to limit the number of witness options so that way it's not overwhelming. But you also create complexity, either with different rules in terms of witness selection or creating different opportunities for people to come up with different theories. I'll give you a recent example of how we sort of manage that tension. In the Park v. Duran case, which was released in 2014 and used through the ORCs in 2015, we created for the first time a witness strike, whereby one side would be able to eliminate from the trial one of the available witnesses, and the other team would have to adapt. So on the one hand, that's giving an opportunity to the more veteran teams if they want to make sophisticated choices about who to strike and under what circumstances. On the other hand, that strike eliminates a witness. That means you have to prepare one fewer cross-examination. So we're trying to create a strategic opportunity for the teams that want to sort of make those tough decisions, while at the same time reducing workload for teams that are really getting into this for the first time. So that's the type of thing we try to do.
During the year, how does AMTA decide what case changes to issue and when to issue them?
So think of case changes as 3 types of case changes. The first usually comes about 2 weeks after we release the case. That's going to be fixing typos, date inconsistencies, things like that. We do our best to proofread the case. When we've got a 150-page document, you're always going to miss something. We want to make sure that, to the extent possible, we fix that before people incur a lot of printing costs. So we'll try to announce when that date is going to be. It's usually a couple weeks after we release. The first set of substantive changes occurs in the fall, sometime after August, usually around winter break, December. At that point, we've had half an invitational season's worth of data in terms of which witnesses are being called and which ones aren't, which case theories are being pursued. We've also seen anecdotal evidence of what works and what doesn't and what may need a fix. So for example, maybe one witness needs to be a little bit stronger, so teams will call that witness. Or a certain fact needs to be included in a cross-examination, so there's foundation for something. Maybe we need a new exhibit altogether. So that's the first set of substantive revisions. It's not particularly meant to challenge, but rather to improve the case because we think there's some deficiency or some shortcoming that we've perceived based on actually seeing the case tried. It's one thing to write it, but you got to see how it appears in action. And the third set of case changes occurs after regionals. On the last day of regionals, after the regionals end, we have our ORCS case changes, or what we call our nationals case changes. And those will be designed not to improve the case, but to make the case more challenging. After several months of the same case, we want these top teams to be challenged, so maybe we'll add a witness or two, or we'll add an exhibit, or we'll flip which sides the witnesses are available for. The idea being that, okay, you've got a little bit less time to prep, what can you do when we switch things up a little bit?
What does AMTA do to try to balance cases?
When we talk about case balance, we're talking about the balance between plaintiff and prosecution on the one side and defense on the other. And what we're talking about is the goal that when teams walk into the courtroom, the winner of their trial is decided not by which side of the case they happen to be on, because there's an inherent advantage to being prosecution or defense, but rather based on the quality of the teams. So we try to create balanced case problems. The way we measure whether a case is balanced is by looking at the case actually tried, and the invitational season is extraordinarily useful for that purpose. So we'll try to get tab summaries from as many tournaments as possible and track the results of plaintiff defense results or prosecution defense results. We pay particular attention to rounds 3 and 4 when teams tend to be paired against equal opponents. We're going to monitor whether the case plays differently in different parts of the country, because sometimes judging pools in one area may be more or less conservative, may have different social views than others, so we want to make sure we're tracking that. We're going to look at whether there's any difference between tournaments attended by veteran teams versus younger teams, because we want to make sure the case is balanced both at regionals and at ORCS. And we're going to track the balance throughout the season to see if a case that starts out balanced becomes less so, or vice versa. So we're really trying to look at everything.
Why does the defense always seem to have a harder time than the prosecution or plaintiff?
I think we try to make it so that, particularly in criminal cases, the prosecution has better facts, much better facts. And there's a couple reasons for that. For one thing, in real life, the prosecution is going to have more facts, presumably, than the defense, because otherwise they wouldn't be going to trial. Somebody wouldn't be prosecuted, hopefully, if there's not some strong evidence against them. From a mock trial balance perspective, though, it's essential that the prosecution in a criminal case have significantly more evidence than the defense. And that's because the defense has sort of an inherent advantage in a mock trial round. They don't have to prove anything, they can just poke holes and attack. We've also found, our statistical analysis committee has found, that judges tend to score higher in the second half of the case. And as a result, that means the defense is getting more scores during the higher scoring portion of the case. In other words, another reason the defense often has an advantage. So we try to make sure that in order to balance the case, we give better facts and better scoring opportunities to the prosecution. That's still true in civil cases, though not to the same extent. So a lot of times students will say, wow, this case really feels slanted toward the prosecution or slanted toward the plaintiff. We don't have any facts on defense. And at the same time, the defense is still winning 50% or more of the ballots. So while I know a lot of students are focused on whether the facts are balanced, our goal is to make sure the results are balanced.
How does AMTA choose witnesses, Justin?
I'm glad you asked. That's Will Warahay, whose voice you hear, the chairperson of our tournament administration committee. We choose witnesses in two respects. First, we're going to focus on the number of witnesses. We want a small enough number that it's not going to overwhelm our younger teams in terms of the amount of cross-examinations they prepare. And we want enough witness options to challenge our more veteran competitors to make sure that they have options in terms of strategy, options in terms of the portrayal they want to use for their particular students. The other thing we're going to think about is not just the number of witnesses, but the type of witnesses. We want expert witnesses that cover different genres. We want character witnesses that can bring some levity and some fun to the trial and to allow some creativity for the teams. We want some sympathetic characters. We want the principals of the case, the plaintiff, the defendant, the key participants. So we want to balance that and, of course, enhance the story that we're trying to present in the particular trial. So one of the things we do when we pick a case is we ask, who are the witnesses going to be? Are they going to be fun to portray? Are they going to be fun to watch? We want to make sure the judges are entertained for those 3 hours, the students are enjoying themselves, and they have some fun witnesses to play.
How do you choose how many witnesses you have in any given case?
So I'd say the average AMTA case has 9 or 10 witnesses. We'll have more if they're going to be side constrained, and that is that they're only available to one side or the other. Sometimes we have what are called swing witnesses, meaning they can swing either the prosecution or the defense. They're available to both sides. And when we have swing witnesses, we tend to have fewer because they create more possibilities simply because they can play either way.
So you talked about those different types of witnesses. Why do you have swing witnesses and side constrained witnesses?
So the advantage of writing a side constrained witness is you know who's going to be doing the direct and who's going to be doing the cross. So it allows you to take harder stances with the facts. When you have a swing witness, particularly with a swing expert, it's tricky because you need to have conclusions that are strong enough to be admissible, but aren't so strong as to make the witness clearly for one side or clearly for the other. We like having swing witnesses in most cases because it forces students to have to think about things from both perspectives, to think, how could one side use this witness? How could the other side use this witness? It also creates variation in terms of how the rounds look. Sometimes you'll have the witness on one side of the case, sometimes on the other. We think that's good both competitively and educationally.
How does AMTA make sure that any student can play any witness?
So we try to make sure that the witnesses are gender neutral. We try to make sure that there's no particular background or ethnicity implied by any of the witnesses. It's been years since we had any particular witness that had demographics assigned to it. For example, we had a hockey case, I think that was 2005, where there was a male defendant and a female prosecution witness. Ever since then, we've had strictly gender-neutral roles. We also know that there's going to be some degree of acting involved. For example, we've had a couple cases now where the witnesses are under the age of 18. 2 teenage witnesses, I think a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, if I'm remembering right. And most of our competitors are obviously older than 14 or 15. We also know that there's been a rise in the number of old person witnesses. People do the costumes, and we know that age restrictions aren't going to affect the ability of different people to play different roles. So we want it to be that when students open up the case, when teams open up the case, they see a variety of different ways that it can be portrayed and different students who can portray those roles.
In 2015, AMTA had a second case for the national championship tournament. Why did AMTA decide to add a second case for the last tournament of the year?
There are a few reasons. For one, we thought that as the competition has gotten stronger, it was necessary to help distinguish the very best teams from one another. I competed from 2000 to 2003, and we like to think of that as the golden era, that whatever year you competed, those are the real tough rounds. But the fact is, competition's gotten harder and harder and harder. The best teams today, I think, are significantly stronger than the best teams when I competed. And even more so, the average teams now are way better than the average teams back when I competed. By the time students get to nationals now, they've used the same case for 6 or 7 months. They've maybe gone to close to 10 tournaments. We think that at that point in the year, they need a new challenge to help distinguish themselves from one another. We think a new case will do that. We also think that a new case will incentivize innovation. By the time you get to national competition, a lot of teams are still using their own ideas, but after seeing how other teams use the case in competition, people borrow ideas from each other, and that's okay, that's within our rules. But it means that by the time they get to nationals, a lot of the ideas they're using, that they're getting scored based on, aren't ideas that they necessarily came up with. And we want to incentivize teams to be creative and be rewarded for their own creativity. On the flip side, we think it's also more realistic in the sense that when you go to court in real life, lawyers don't have the luxury of getting to try their case dozens of times before they actually see a jury. Because when you stand up and say, "May it please the court," you're live. So we like the idea that at championship, when teams get up and give their round one performance, that's the first time it counts. We think that more closely resembles the real world. It creates a more pure competition and it rewards innovation.
What are some factors that AMTA considered to make Heisman doable in only a month's time?
So this last year, the 2015 case, Ginger v. Heisman, was the first time that we used a new case at Nationals. So we're still getting used to it, and I'm hoping that we can do even better in future years. But I can tell you that our first year, we were absolutely attuned to trying to make it manageable in the 4 weeks that students had to prepare. So what do we do to do that? First, the case was significantly shorter than our past cases. Our past 5 cases prior to Heisman were about 140 pages each. The Heisman case clocked in at about 75 to 80 pages. We also tried to limit the number of witnesses. There's only 8 witnesses in the case, and most of those are side constrained. There's only 3 swing witnesses, and a case with just 8 witnesses. So there weren't too many variations the teams had to prepare. Third, we tried to make sure that, particularly with expert witnesses, they didn't have to read too many people's affidavits. So maybe you have a case with only 10 witness statements, but if some of those experts have to read 5 others, that creates a tremendous amount of work that the students portraying those roles have to do. In Heisman, by contrast, of the 8 witnesses, 7 of them only had to know their own statements, and the 8th had to know that witness's statement and 1 other. So there wasn't nearly as much preparation to play the expert roles. We also tried to simplify the case. In Park v. Duran, there were all sorts of options like witness strikes. There was a selection of one theory versus the other. There were multiple depositions. And we've done things like that in our other cases. In the Heisman case, there was basically only a couple different ways the plaintiff could proceed and only a couple ways the defense could proceed, and neither precluded particular strategies from the other side. So we wanted to make it the kind of thing that you could read the case once, know how you wanted to try it, and start preparing fairly soon.
Is there anything else you'd like AMTA competitors to know about how AMTA prepares cases or structures their competition?
So always remember that we're looking to get better. So if you read the case and you think that there's something we can make better, let us know. If you have a case that you want to write or an idea for a case, let us know. And if you want to join the AMTA Board of Directors or volunteer for one of our committees, like our case writing committee, let us know. We're always looking to improve and we're always looking for new blood.